Hello, everyone. For my lesson plan, I decided to center it on the short story titled A Perfect Day for Bananafish by J.D. Salinger. My goal for this lesson is to see how students read and interpret a text. Then, based on their inferences, can they make a solid argument for their viewpoint on a story? I chose this short story as the subject for this lesson because there can be two interpretations of what the story means. I remember reading this story as a senior in high school, and many of my peers, myself included, thought the text was about a young man who struggled with pedophilic tendencies as he interacted with a young girl. Our teacher pointed out how we missed the key points that the main character had served in World War II and may have been struggling to re enter society after his return, only able to find solace and companionship with children who are mostly unaffected by war due to their naivety. For my lesson, I actually had my sister read the text, and we enacted what I would want this lesson to look like if I were actually teaching it to a high school class, even though it was a one on one type of session. And so I had her read the text that one time through without doing any highlighting, annotating, or anything of the sort. And then after she read the text, the first time, then I had her read through it again, this time highlighting and annotating anything that she thought was the main idea or key points of the story as a whole. After she had done this, then we discussed what she had discovered. And then lastly, I finally had her write a short paragraph about why she thought that her interpretation of the story may be the right interpretation, and I had her use textual evidence to prove that her paragraph or that her argument was true. The Common Core standards that I tried to follow in my lesson plan were the three under the literacy standards using key ideas and details for students who were in 11th and 12th grade. These were the standards that I used. 1. Cite strong and thorough textual evidence to support analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text, including determining where the text leaves matters uncertain. 2. Determine two or more themes or central ideas of a text and analyze their development over the course of the text, including how they interact and build on one another to produce a complex account. Provide an objective summary of the text. And 3. Analyze the impact of the author's choices regarding to develop and relate elements of a story or drama, where the story is set, how the action is ordered, and how the characters are introduced and developed. So the main materials that one would need to teach this lesson is a copy for every student of the short story. It's only about 4 pages long, which isn't too bad for a short story. And then they should also have highlighters, pens, and paper so that they can annotate and take notes along the margins of the text. And then the paper at the end is for their own short paragraph or their short argument about what they think this story is actually about. It would be important for students to have knowledge about PTSD from war or prior knowledge about veterans or what we do now to help soldiers when they come back from fighting in wars over time, because that's what Seymour, the main character of this story, is struggling with and battling with. And we hear about this in the conversation that occurs with his mother-in-law and his wife, and then later when he actually takes his own life by the end of the story. So it would be important for students to know or have that information available. This is a good short story to have with students in the 11th grade because they're just learning about U.S. history and probably in the middle of the year as they're learning more about World War II. It'd also be good for senior students to learn as well because they should have already learned about World War II at this point. And it'd be good for them to kind of read how authors are interpreting the events that happen or how people readjust to World War II. And other great authors that can be read alongside this would probably be Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises. That's a good book to introduce as people are trying to re-enter society as well. My main goal with this lesson is to really build up the skills for my students to have the ability to annotate a text, to take notes in the margins, to see where they find key themes, what they learn about characters, even in a short story like this, because as short as it is, there's so many layers to what is happening in the narrative, from the conversation that the mother and the daughter have to the young girl, her name is Sybil in the story, and how she interacts with Seymour, how Seymour interacts with the little girl, and then also how Seymour interacts with people after the little girl is no longer in the picture, and what he does by the end of the narrative. I want students to be able to see these small little inferences of what the author is deciding to put into his story, and how and what they can take away from the text, and how do they understand the text when it's all said and done. To check for understanding and to see if students are actually doing it, that's why I want them to actually physically take notes and annotate and highlight everything, but also to have discussion. I would like to see where their thoughts are, and then have their thoughts build upon each other's thoughts. I think there's so much to be gained from having a discussion amongst people and talking about this story, because one person's interpretation of a story can be completely different. And that is so true for this narrative in itself, because there are two main interpretations, but even from that can trickle other interpretations as well. So my main way to check for understanding is to ask them guiding questions to see if they noticed some of the little details. In an ideal world, if I were to actually make this into a full on unit or into a homework assignment, I would probably have my students actually try to do research on PTSD or research on what veterans are doing. That way, we can have real world applications interacting with a work of fiction, so that they could see what the effects were from those who came back home from fighting in the war back then, and what is going on now. What programs do we have in place for veterans? What are we doing to help them re-enter society and function to the best of their abilities after everything that they've seen, after everything that they've done? And so, again, what programs do we have? How do we help with the suicide rates of veterans? What programs are there? What facilities are available? What services are available for them? And how can we help those that may not be reached? And what are the factors that may lead veterans to be in the places that they are when they re enter?
So after reading through this short story, what can you tell me about, like, who are the main characters in this story?
There's a girl,
Mm-hmm.
Muriel,
Mm-hmm.
her mom that she talks to. She mentions her dad, but not really anything about him. The dad talked to a doctor. There's Seymour, who is her husband.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Mrs. Carpenter, who's the mother of
Sybil.
Sybil, and Sharon Lipschitz.
Okay. And what can you tell me? So there's kind of two parts to the story, right?
Yeah.
What's happening in the first part?
The first part is the girl at the hotel,
Mm-hmm.
and she is waiting for her room. It sounds like there's many people there. Then she finally gets her room. She answers the phone, and she's speaking to her mom, but they don't communicate very well. They cut each other off at a lot of different parts of their conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And her mom's really worried about her safety and about Seymour. She mentioned trees several times in their conversation.
What page were you on?
They mentioned trees the first time on page 1.
Mm-hmm.
And then actually twice on page 1, and then again on page 2.
Right. Okay, I see that.
She said something about her dad talking to a doctor regarding Seymour, and he told him everything. At least he said, "Did you know your father? Oh, the trees, that business with the window, those horrible things he said to Granny about her plans for passing away." and that's when I said he doesn't like Seymour doesn't sound okay.
I like how you annotated this here and like highlighted the different things that you noticed in detail about this passage.
Yeah, because it goes on to say Seymour may completely lose control of himself, and she says that twice if you go further down.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when I looked back at when this was written. More so when I got to page 3 because it said, "All right, just all right though. We couldn't get the room we had before the war." And then I went back to page 2 where she mentions the army,
Mm-hmm.
and then that's when I looked back to see when this was written, and it was near war times.
Mm-hmm. So, what do you remember when World War II occurred, or kind of the years? So that was around 1940 to 1945.
Yeah.
So this is a little bit after that time. So good job noticing those small details about him possibly being in the army and them being there before the war. What do you make of the daughter in this story and how she's adamant? Like, we have her mother who is constantly worried about her safety because to her something seems up with Seymour.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the daughter keeps telling her, "Mother, there's nothing to worry about. He's fine. I'm not worried about him doing anything." What do you make of that?
When I read that part, I watched This Is Us, so
Mhm.
I was mainly thinking about the main character Jack, who served in like a war. I don't remember which one, but in terms of his own mental health or like behavior,
Mm-hmm.
he would never do anything to hurt his wife.
Right.
If anything, he'd go to a punching bag or do boxing or anything that was an outlet for him,
Mm-hmm.
but he would never hurt Rebecca.
Right.
And so in this scenario, if Seymour was going through something, I don't think he'd ever lash out at Muriel.
Mm-hmm.
Because also with Jack and Rebecca, like Jack never really talked about what he experienced. He really kept that to himself.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, if like Seymour was going through things, I think he would have just kept it to himself and dealt with it in his own ways, which he did.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So that's why I think she knew that it wasn't something that she needed to talk to him about. It was something he would go to her to talk about. But I don't think she thought of herself to be in danger.
So after reading through our story for today and kind of discussing the two different sides that we noticed, I want you to just write a short paragraph about your view or your take on the story and why you think that's maybe the right view and why the other view may be incorrect based on the conclusions that you came up with. Okay, so what have you written?
Okay. So I said, I believe the banana fish description is a metaphor for those who are enlisted in the army. They enter normally, but war changes you, and it is difficult to resort back to the life you once lived when you return. If it is true that Seymour was dealing with PTSD or some other life reorienting situation, there is a chance he dealt with anxiety or triggers. The moment at the beach, the interaction in the elevator, or something else could have been enough for him to choose to end his own life, which is why I think this story is more so a message to the audience saying we never know what someone's going through, or especially if it's someone like a veteran, where their mind is or what they experienced while they're in war, and anything could be triggering to them. And sometimes there's situations that are more calming for them and some situations that are more overwhelming for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a big message from this story.
Well, thank you.